board. And that's when I can officially say, welcome to this week's weekly briefing. I'm going to kill the music. There we go. All right, greetings. I am Joel here, joined with Tim, who I'm going to spotlight. Are you ready, Tim? Put on your game face.
There we go.
So welcome everyone. Today is Thursday, April 22nd. Welcome to this week's edition of the weekly briefing. This is the moment where we pause and we do a quick 30-minute briefing on a hot topic, news around the industry, an issue that owners are talking about, dealing with. And Tim, I think that's sort of the entry point for today's conversation, because last week you and Jason talked about what, and then that led to this segue of what we're talking about today.
Yeah, welcome. Happy Thursday. Good to see you, Joel. I'm glad you can join us again after all your traveling.
Good to be back.
What's interesting is even after last week, I got in a conversation earlier this week where someone was asking me, they had struggled with some people in their production team a few times. And so the question came about is, could I prioritize sales? Like, am I really waiting for production to be fully on board, or can I do sales first? And I thought to myself, like, how would this strategy work if we put sales in front of production, or do we have to do things in an order? So that's what kind of initiated the conversation I had of like, let's talk about that this week in the weekly briefing.
So by way of reminder, and Tim, we have to confess, you hear us talk a lot about the seasons of a creative firm, the 7 ingredients, but we don't always do such a great job at really explaining that. I think it's because we're so close to it. We speak this language every day. So to start things, I thought, let's actually just do a quick recap of what's this concept that we're talking about. So I'm going to share my screen. And here are the seasons of the creative firm, right? You see at the bottom, launch to exit. And you go through these seasons in your business. You start up, then you're emerging, then you're thriving, then you're mature. So as these seasons play out, what we've observed, and this is from years when I was running my own company, and Tim, of course, you working with all shapes and sizes of companies over, 15 years now?
Yeah, or more, yeah.
Or more. And here's what happens, right? That there are these ingredients that business owners master as they go along this journey. And you start with creative first, and then entrepreneurship. You start your business. And then you enter this emerging season and you start to master production. Of course, what does that mean? Well, we'll get to that. And then as you continue growing and evolving, you start to master what? You master sales and finance. And now you're in this thriving season. And then ultimately, you hopefully arrive at this mature stage, which doesn't necessarily mean big. It's not necessarily a size thing. It's a maturity thing. And you're going to master marketing and operations. So when it all comes together, this is this pattern that we've observed in how companies grow and evolve. And so Tim, the question is, if I'm a business owner and I launched my company, we're doing great creative, right? We've landed we're in business and we've landed a big project, or I want to go land a big project. What's the issue? Do I really have to think about these things in order? Why would that even be a concern?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think our process has been one of defining something we've discovered or looking at a pattern we've discovered and just putting it out on paper. That's our process of originally talking about the 7 ingredients. And Joel, that's that spaghetti drawing we did, 10 years ago on the whiteboard of just trying to figure out what is this roadmap and how does it work? But in the thought process there is, am I just following someone else's pattern, or could I do something out of order, do something different? And I'm going to say right now, what I know for certain is a hardcore, no, you can't actually do this out of order. Now you can try to do it out of order and you might find some success, but if we're talking about the full pattern of going from a startup to a mature business and finally exiting, if you don't do the first things first, you will hold yourself back and you start to clash with your desire for a business and what their business is actually doing, and those moments where you're struggling. And where I see it most often is people often call us when they have a revenue problem. And they imagine what they're looking for is how to fix sales or how to start sales or how to get more sales. And so they want us to give them the sales trick. When we do an analysis, we start much sooner than that. And we might do like a factors report looking at some financials, but even start putting production processes in place. And I think at first people want to say, I'm not talking to you about production. I'm talking to you about sales. Can we focus? And we, in realigning their expectations, give them a new discovery, give them a breakthrough of what it's like to put first things first.
So I'm going to pretend like I'm going back to maybe my early years when I started my business. And I'll just tell you, first of all, of course, I just want jobs. Like I'm clearly starting my company and I want projects, I want bigger projects, I want more money. And why would that be a bad thing? Because that's what at least it seems like, it feels like that's what I need most. And clearly, like you said, this is when every time we talk about sales, owners show up because everyone has this idea, right, of sales is going to solve all my problems. So do you have an example of when that is not the case?
Yeah, sure. So again, the setup is that if you imagine sales to solve all problems, and you're therefore put sales first in front of something, you can imagine a company with a lot of revenue, a large company with a lot of revenue has all the solutions, right? So I have an example of a company that I worked with. They were over $20 million with sales, sometimes nearly $30 million a year with the sales. But over and over again, repeatedly in their history, they generated $2 million negative every year. So you would imagine, like, if sales solves all problems, why is this company between 20 and $30 million in revenue generating negative dollars? Where a different scenario I can give you is I've worked with a company that had $3 million a year in revenue. I worked with them for 1 year. They had, by the way, it's $3 million in very little profit when I started working with them. At the end of 1 year, they still generated $3 million worth a year, but they generated $1 million in profit. So how did I get $1 million out of a company that only generated $3, and a company that generated $30 million in revenue has negative money? So it just goes to show you total revenue and more revenue doesn't solve the problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I was just sitting here thinking about how if we were to look at these seasons, I'll bring them up again here, and I would say to you, Tim, I'm generating $1 million or $2 million a year. Like, we're really cooking with gas now. We're doing awesome. And you would say, well, no, you're not yet thriving, because if you're under 2 million, you're most likely still in this emerging season. Again, that's like the common pattern, right? Thriving is probably between 2 and 8 million, and mature is, generally speaking, 8 million, 10 million and above. So there's still a lot to learn, but what's funny is many owners, no matter what season they're in, no matter what that number is, and if you ask them, do they have a sales problem? They say, yes. Right? I have a sales problem, and I could solve all these things if I could just figure out sales. But clearly the people that are generating, what you said, 20, 30 million, they must have figured something out about sales to do that kind of a number, but yet they still, what I'm hearing you say was they still believed they had a sales problem.
Well, if that was their focus, and it kind of was one of the priorities they had, us like, well, let's just hire more salespeople. Thinking again, that would solve the problem. But if you think about it like this, if that company, we'll just call it 30 million because it sounds a better comparison to the company at 3, they had to produce $30 million worth of work to make negative 2 million. When another company only had to produce $3 million of work and they made $3 million more dollars than the company at 30. Because the company at 30 made negative 2, and the company at 3 made positive +1.
Right.
So I would rather be in a position where I generated $3 million in revenue and had $1 million in profit than have to do 30 million worth of work and going backwards. And so you have to recognize there is like, there's something else happening of really in how you spend the revenue you're making. And you have to be able to understand and put into place what that expectation is and the parameters of what it takes to spend this money, and put right first things first before you ever go generate even more money, because more sales means more work. And if you're going the wrong way, it means even further off course, bigger problems.
So maybe let's give everyone a sense. If I'm that owner and we're doing $1 million or $2 million a year, and I'm thinking, yeah, I want bigger sales. I want more projects because I know if I get to 2 or 3 million, that's when I'm going to be happy or something. If I haven't mastered production, what happens?
Sure. Yeah, think of it. Production is easy to define as the product you're pushing out the door, right? So it's actually the thing that you are going to sell, and it's the thing you're going to make. So without product in place or production in place, you really aren't selling the right. Your salesperson aren't selling the right elements to begin with. So we often use the word commoditization, where if you don't know what the product is you're selling, then you're only selling the pieces and the sum of the pieces. And that commodity field, you're often, especially with your sales team, chasing the lower end numbers. You believe, by the way, in sales, discounts win, right? So if I want to sell more, I have to discount more, is how sales would go after solving a problem. When it comes to solving the problem on the production side, what you're doing is guaranteeing a product, you're guaranteeing a method, and guaranteeing delivery of a good, and that good has value. If you put production first, and then you do sales after production, then what your sales team is selling and learns to sell is the product, which is a value proposition over a commodity proposition. And that's just the beginning of how the pieces fall in place. But that's where setting that one priority really begins giving you a basis for how the company grows. It also generates a great pipeline. And the pipeline that's good and strong has the ability to scale. So you can now imagine if you only had a $1 million pipeline, but generated $3 million worth of sales, your $1 million pipeline is going to be in crisis. And a $1 million pipeline looks like one good producer and a creative person. You don't know how to generate or work with a second producer, how to delegate to others, how to build up a group, how to develop resources. You kind of are currently kind of smaller, not as experienced, and might have not as many resources at your fingertips. So you have a limited current ability. More sales doesn't solve the ability to generate a larger pipe. So that function of a pipeline and perfecting the production ingredient really is projecting a system and a method and routines so that when more opportunity comes, the pipeline can expand. And here's what's important. When less opportunity comes, it also contracts to always meet the need. And that's why that $3 million business makes more profit than the $30 million business. It's because they rightly managed their decisions and their production decisions to fit the revenue they were making, instead of hoping more revenue would make more profit.
Yeah, there's an old joke. I can't remember. It's called something like the salesman's wager or dilemma or something. But it's the salesperson who comes back to the company and says, hey, I just sold this project, right, for X dollars. And the company says, why did you do that? We're losing money. And he's like, because that's my job and we'll make it up on volume. Meaning
Exactly
if I sell 10 more projects like this, we'll make it up on volume. And of course, the smart business owner is like, no, if we're losing $100,000 on this project, you bring 10 more, now I'm losing $1 million. So there's something to be said for, because what I hear you saying is production, part of production is guaranteeing profit no matter what. Every job, every time there's profit. And I know that sounds crazy because we've had people claim you can't guarantee that. You can't say that profits are bulletproof, but we can.
Yeah. I say, yes, you can. You just spend less than you make. You guarantee profit every time you spend less money than you make. So the production ingredient specifically, and that's that one stage right before you kind of leave the startup beginning of your business, right? And before you step into thriving, that one last stage you have to get in place is, how do we guarantee we're going to always get the same product out the door, or always guarantee the value that clients come to expect?
Right.
What happens at some moment is you realize you hit it, and now a salesperson coming in creates greater opportunity for you. First of all, you can be selective. You say no to the wrong projects, yes to the right projects. So that's the beginning of making more profit and guaranteeing returns. But you also, as you said, yes, then that capability also grows. And here's what's interesting. You have to also, at the same time when you're doing sales, you have to also master finance. And it's really the first time ever you had to do two ingredients instead of just one ingredient. And if you wish away this like preliminary foundation of your company and you jump right into a sales problem and you haven't figured out how finance is impacted by generating more work and production handling it, you're even running in blindly. And
Right.
that's a major crisis. And now you want to know the first phone call we often get from companies? That's the one. They've been running blind for a long time. They didn't know what they're doing and why it went sour. They're in a crisis moment. They're out of money. They don't know who to hire next. And they want it to be more revenue will solve the problem. But the last time they did that, the salesperson failed them, the production team failed them, and they actually stepped backwards instead of move forward. And they wanted to put first things first.
Well, this also kind of explains why I think about when I lived this life, and a lot of owners would say, no, we're really thriving because we're super busy, right? And we're doing much bigger jobs than we did a few years ago. So there's this feeling of, hey, we have a lot of momentum. We're thriving now. But those people are often very overworked. And if you had said to me, hey, Joel, I need you to master the finance ingredient now, I would have looked at you like you're crazy. Like, yeah, I don't really have the bandwidth for that.
Yeah. Well, do you remember when you actually did hire me as a consultant, I think your initial thoughts were, oh, Tim's going to come in and teach us some financial ideas. And we kind of had the financial team together with the production team. And I threw everyone off a little bit because I started talking about production and the production process.
Oh, yeah.
And the production team was the one going like, wait, almost like, why did I get on the hot seat? I'm producing projects. I don't have any problem with clients. And they didn't realize the impact of the decisions they were making had a bigger impact on the overall corporate health. Because if we give the project too much money, if we don't manage clients' expectations sooner than later, or recognize when we're going beyond the scope of the project, then we are not financing and producing this return that the company needs. And it's those resources you need to grow your business, which is why a under $2 million business, the example you gave before, is not in the thriving season. At $2 million, US dollars is a US based economy, but at $2 million, you don't have enough resource to invest in marketing and operations. You can't actually get to the later pieces of your lifespan as a business because you didn't have the resources available to lean into and do that properly. So you really have to be able to break past in that $4 to $8 million range in order to start developing the resources and getting the maturity factor in place. And you might be hiring the right person or developing that person, but you still need to have some investment to invest forward that way.
So who has questions? I know we're 20 minutes in here. If you have a question or a comment, we certainly welcome it. Happy to have someone raise a hand or drop a comment in the chat here. Because I know a lot of what we're talking about here is conceptual and, I know people are probably wondering, but what does that mean and look like in my business? I will say this, I'm really excited because I know that there is this journey that everyone is on. And when they start recognizing, like, okay, so if we're in this emerging season now, there is this opportunity. I'll go back to a little diagram, right?
Yeah.
All right, so we've got creative and the basics of entrepreneurship here. As we start to master production, right, we do start to move into mastering sales and finance. We're starting to at least think about those things. And, my favorite thing, of course, is to teach a lot of the mindset and foundational principles that lay the groundwork for what I find are the best practices of owners that are running these thriving firms, and really, rattling some people's thinking and that sort of thing as I take them through that process. But let's see here. I'm curious. One question I got here behind the scenes, Tim, was, so if we don't yet have a producer, where should we begin, right? And that's kind of a common pattern to the person that maybe is the creative director that started the company and hired an animator, hired an art director, hired an editor, and is like stuck wondering, well, where would I even begin to master that ingredient?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because if you break down what we're talking about in each of these ingredients, it's important to recognize the details of each one, right? So clearly, if you are in the very startup stages of your business and you really are a creative person or a creative team, that you, even if you hire freelance producers, but on a full-time producer, what you really are currently focusing on is the design, hoping that you can get the right design or the right creative elements in front of the client. But in your mentality at that point, and really the best services you can provide aren't much different than a freelance designer. It really is the client is doing the bulk of the work, running the project themselves if you don't have a producer, and then asking you to execute piece by piece. And you're really at the very beginning stages of running your own business because you're still somewhat using your creative as the commodity you're leveraging forward. It's not that creative isn't important. As we know, creative has to win. That's what we're all in the business for. But we have to be able to turn that creative into a product. We have to know that we can repeat something over and again. So when we start mastering the creative ingredient, and why we want to have a full-time producer, is we want to start to be able to put systems and routines into place to make that guarantee that we can get it done. And the first systems you put in place is a very good budget for a client, a very good understanding of your cost and your rates, and how you're going to, one, pitch those rates to the client and win the overall bid, but then reinterpret that dollars internally to manage the costs so that you can also finance the current overhead and the future overhead of the business. And it's that outward facing bidding proposition and the inward facing cost and cost management proposition that begins the mastery of the production ingredient and starts getting the detail of the possible decisions your company can make. So that's what we're really looking for, is that control over those decisions and putting first things first and right things right to make that happen. I always think of your car as a vehicle sometimes. I'm like, that's the steering wheel. Now, when you want to turn left, you can actually turn left. You want to turn right, you want to turn right.
Right, it's responsive.
So that's why I want to do it first. I'll build the high beams with my sales team next, or my headlights and my windshield next. But I want to make sure I first control this thing.
Yeah, maybe. And your cash flow is almost like a radar. It goes around corners. And
yeah,
right?
That's exactly right. It's that sonar that's happening in the automated vehicle things.
Right. Tells you the bridge is out before you can even see it. Yeah. Well, something I heard you saying that I think is actually really cool was I heard you talking about that little nuance of how mastering production, and there's even a mindset of, wait, when we start engaging with clients, we're not bringing them to our costs to them, right? That's an internal basis or an internal calculation. No, we're bringing them a price, and they engage with us. We take whatever plan that we pitched them, we sold them on, we probably throw it in the trash and create a new plan called, now how are we going to actually get the job done? And that's that's part production, but that's also part of this mindset that we're talking about as you move from emerging to thriving. There's a lot there, but I mean, there's so much magic there, because I'm thinking of how many owners I've heard from in maybe just the past month or two, say within Confab, for example, where people are realizing, yes, I had no idea we could charge way more to these same clients than we were previously. But it was a shift in mindset, but it was also this mastering of production. How are we getting these things done? How do we track them? How do we deliver on time, on budget, but also be profitable every single time? And it's a magical thing when that coin drops in the slot.
And one thing I like to when I work with a company that has a strong production team and not yet have the finance or sales things in place, right? So they're ready to jump into that thriving position in their company. Is that one thing I like to do, and people that have worked with me know this for certain, I leverage the decision-making in production to make finance possible. I'll explain it this way. If I know my production team knows what decisions to make to be successful with the project, right? So they have their production items in place, then I can actually give them direction from a financial position. I say, hey, if you're delivering a subjective project, right? It's creative, so therefore somewhat subjective, and you know how to make profit, could you make profit with 10% less money? And of course, a good production team would say, well, of course, I can make any project work with any amount of money. That's what I do for a living, as I fit the capability within the scope of the deliverable, and then our creative team produces to that end result. So it's that mastery now of finance be able to give insight to production, but also this is why you have to have finance in place with sales, is also give sales a perspective of what a winning project looks like financially, and give sales the scope of the type of revenue we're looking for, and even overall revenue we can afford right now. So now I give my sales team targets, my production team oversight and insight on where the money's going. And then corporately, I'm capturing revenue and investing it forward in the business to help it even grow further. That's where that one like finance ingredient almost becomes like the rear view mirror and the windshield of the company, so that it can see backwards and forwards and start making newer decisions around corners. As you say, I can start doing different things, and my vehicle, I can turn the vehicle and adjust as I need to go.
All right. So I know there were some heads that probably flew off there for just a moment, because what I heard you just say, which sounds totally nuts, is sure, we can make a profit no matter what the project is, no matter what the budget is. And there's all kinds of people right now that are saying, no, Tim, our clients won't let us.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? It's one of the first lies we tell ourselves, is that we won't be liked until we overproduce. So we have this understanding of overproduce or deliver more than the client's expecting, which is good in principle. I like that idea, but we should never pay more than what the client paid us. That's like the parameter of the budget is the parameter the client gave you. The client's basically telling you the most value I'm going to get from this project is $30,000. So why, as a production company, would you spend 35? The client can't even realize that kind of spending. And in reality, you need to be spending 15 or 20 in costs in order to make a $30,000 budget work. Yeah. And if the client wants more, they give you more revenue so you can create more resources. But it is not your job, and it should never be your job, to spend all of your clients' money and then some of the company's money as well. It's crazy. It's foolish. There are a few times I've been wrong on that, and I can count them on one hand. And I'll tell those people know when I told them that advice, and I was wrong and they're right. But it's so few and far between. It's an extreme exception, never the rule.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I think there is I don't want to be too judgmental here, but it's a less mature mindset that says, no, we have to over deliver. We have to give as much money back to the clients as possible. We have to. And I think that's a mindset that you grow out of, and you start to realize we can actually produce incredible value by spending about half the money on the project, and the other half goes to our company costs, and also allows us to provide another super valuable thing that we couldn't do when we were super small, and that is risk, man. We're helping them avoid risk. Like, we know we will deliver and we will not fail. They will have something incredibly valuable. And that's a big part of what it is that we're delivering, even though we're only spending half the dollars, right, on the people and the freelancers and the footage and all those kinds of variables.
Yeah, I think actually the word immature is right, because where you're talking from, Joel, is exactly your sweet spot, in that a mature company has marketing in place. And what happens with marketing is that you realize that the values are already been adjusted for and captured. And that's why the client has called you. Your mentality shifts to, I don't have to prove that I'm worth it with the company. With my marketing team and my marketing positioning and who I am in the marketplace, the fact that the client has called me means I've already proven I'm worth it. I don't have to do it after I've received the job anymore. I already am worth it. I just simply have to execute what I promised from the beginning. And that mature business that understands the marketing and operations pieces of it is one that's leveraging themselves into and leaning back on who they are and always will be. And you can have that mentality early on, even if your company is at $1 million or $2 million, you can begin that process. But that's that final value proposition that you always have in place. And it's the greatest thing you leverage in the engagement with the client.
Well, I know we need to wrap up here. So I'm going to mention that we're going to somewhat build on this concept next week. because we're going to do a special session next week because I've invited some owners to come and give us a little practical glimpse of what does this actually look like. So here I'm going to give a little preview. And so you'll see this is a briefing for next week, which is the 28th. We're going to send out a link to everyone so you can register. How do you like this title, Tim? The surprising psychology of success, 4 owners, 4 shifts. So just be on the lookout for that. Please share it, spread the word. I think it's going to be cool because hearing from 4 different owners sharing their perspective on, yes, this was a game changer for us. This was a game changer for us. It's going to give everyone some very practical takeaways to see how other companies how they've made their progress along this journey.
Joel, can you put that slide back up? Because I just want you to know, I don't think this counts as alliteration. I know psychology sounds like it starts with an A, but it starts with a P and it doesn't win your alliteration game.
But I chose it
because
it sounds like alliteration. Yes.
Those of you listening to audio only are hearing alliteration, but with the word, it has a P in front of psychology. It doesn't really work.
You know me much too well. Oh, that's so funny. Well, look, we appreciate everyone here. Tim, let's just see if we can maybe answer a question or two real quick.
Sure.
Because Dominic said, I hear from so many owners that they want to get into originals. Best way we've been able to do it is get our splits right and have cash in the bank. Dang. Yeah. Well, we could talk about that for a half hour, right?
Yeah. But what Dominic has right and what he's testifying here is that he basically has put first things first and decided to invest in his business by using his client's money to do it. So by holding back on delivering to the client, he now has resources and revenue to meet his own need, and his team still delivers. That's its subjective nature in mastering the production ingredient.
So Angelique, look at this amazing question. What does the compromise look like when allocating a budget and an amount to a project whilst allowing creative to win and still remain profitable? I'm just going to say that's the job.
Well, I would also say it isn't a compromise. It's actually it's how it actually works. The compromise is when you over deliver to a client more than they paid for it and compromise internal needs and desires to get something done. Here's the reality, right? The item we're delivering is creative by nature. So the beginning of making promises to the client and managing those clients' expectations starts really early on. And the client gives you the parameter of time and budget, and you're fitting that need from the very beginning. So you're just simply setting the correct expectations and meeting those expectations from the beginning. It's not oversetting expectation and then compromising, pulling back. As long, like Joel said this, they're mitigating their risk by giving you the project and not doing it themselves. You already have provided a value by taking their phone call and saying yes to their project. That's the true value. The deliverable is just the execution of the idea that they've accepted. So there is no compromise. There's no need to compromise. You just meet their needs every time over and over again, and you will win and they will win.
Well, there's a big idea there. I love that kind of crazy idea that it's not a compromise. I'm also going to say, Angelique, let's make sure that that company is super well positioned, that you're coming into that situation as experts, and you've gotten every dollar out of that client's pocket. Now let's start to create that plan of how are we going to do this project and balance creativity, profitability, all that kind of thing. So we'll get into that more next week. So that's my little tease for next week.
Great.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We're 5 minutes over. Really good to be with all of you. Thank you for joining us for the weekly briefing. And we will see you all next week for the, what was it? I got to get my alliteration down, Tim. Surprising psychology of success. So be on the lookout for that. And we'll see you all next week. So have a great rest of the week. Tim, thanks again.
Talk to you later.
Okay. Bye, everyone.